Please start the
Yeah. Can I get my laptop on the laptop then, please? Oh, great. Okay, well,
Do you want to read yours here first?
no, so needs to read off there, but I can put mine here.
We know that screen identifies because on live then most of the Yes, good point. So I might have a quick look for my laptop. Go to the screen from so that's the link there. That's it.
Yeah, we should be ready to start. So this is what we can see.
Yeah, but there'll be nobody joining because of course it's got a new stream ID, not the one that you sent out. You see what I mean? It's the schedule then. So we have to send out another update.
Yeah. Well, it should. If people go to our YouTube channel, they can see the live stream.
Yeah, I'll go and check that now.
And they've all got the link to the YouTube channel as well.
Check.
Yeah. Me first, and then Pat, and then speaker first is going to be Graham. Green t-shirt on. Yeah, take a picture of that on the right. I'm just finding I'll do the housekeeping as well. I asked Stephanie about that. Right, hello everybody and thank you for coming. Today is the 2018 Free UK Genealogy Conference where we are celebrating 20 years of Free BND, our oldest and very useful project. So I'm Denise Colbert, the Engagement Coordinator for Free UK Gen, and I'm going to just give you some housekeeping and some information about the way the afternoon will shape up. So first of all, you may have already gathered that there is a toilet just outside of those doors, if you need it. There are no drills, no fire drills expected, but if the alarm does go off, then our lovely hostess Emily will see to us getting to the right fire exit in an orderly fashion, just remain calm. So I'm going to pass over to Pat in a minute to give you an update on Free UK Genealogy and our projects. And then after that, we've got Graham Hart, one of our trustees, who will be speaking on Free BND, past, present and future at 12:20. At 1:45, another of our trustees, Alexandra Everly, will be speaking about crowdsourcing, after which at 1:15 we will break for lunch. Half an hour, 40 minutes. 1:55 we'll come back and we'll hear from Audrey Collins, who works at the National Archives, and she will be speaking to you about the GRO records specifically. And then at 2:30, Elsa Churchill from the Society of Genealogists, she is the Society's resident genealogist, will be speaking to you about birth, marriage and death records beyond the GRO. So we hope you have a lovely afternoon with us, and we'll enjoy some cake and coffee at around 3:05 in the breakout area at the back. After which there will be a discussion at about 3:25 and we are aiming for the 4:00 end. Okay, so it's lovely to see so many people here and thank you once again for coming. Now I'm going to pass over to Pat Reynolds, the Executive Director of UK Genealogy.
Thank you, Denise, and thank you everybody for coming. I'm hoping that the live streaming is working okay despite the usual technical difficulties. I was somewhat relieved to find when speaking to the TNA yesterday about live streaming that They had their first live streaming event last week and they paid somebody £15,000 to make it work. If this doesn't work, it's because we didn't pay anybody anything. My first thing I was going to speak about was housekeeping, but we've just on the fly changed that. The one thing I would add to what Denise has said, if you just want to go down and grab a sandwich from the cafe downstairs, or if you've brought your own sandwiches, you're very welcome to come and eat them up here. You may have discovered that there is a nice viewing sort of overlook behind and round to the right there, where there's lots of seating, where you may sit yourselves to eat your sandwiches. On to the rest of what I was going to say as part of the welcome. Today we are really focusing on FreeBMD and celebrating 20 years of one of the most fantastic transcription projects run by volunteers, achieved through the work of thousands of volunteers that there is, still very used today. I would like, therefore, to focus my introduction around what's happening in the other projects of Free UK Genealogy and Free UK Genealogy in general. The first thing I wanted to talk about was a lot of what the support team, myself, Denise, Rich, over there somewhere, Helen the digitizer and Helen the bookkeeper do, is actually really boring stuff. So a lot of what we've been focusing on over the last few months is the GDPR legislation, which has taken us a huge amount of time and we're still working on. Like many open data organisations, we are actually passionate about privacy, and we have been doing an awful lot to make sure that the personal data of our transcribers, our researchers, is protected as it should be. But we are also an open data organisation and an open source organisation. And one of the things that we've been working on in this past year is inviting both new transcribers on FreeSend and FreeReg and existing transcribers on those projects to sign a transcription agreement which will allow us to open their data to anybody that wants to use it for whatever purpose. I'm very pleased to say that to date that about 20% of the records on FreeReg are now open. We haven't quite finished the work at the back end, which will allow us to serve them, but they are servable. And of those 20% of people who've signed the agreement, it's about 30%. No, sorry, I've got the wrong statistics in my head, doing them off the top of my head. Look at what we've written down, how many will get it right. Yes, it's about 12% of the active volunteers, but those are 20% of the records, or that's over 8 million records, which is about, just coincidentally, about half the death records, if they were all death records, because we passed the 15 million death records on FreeReg just a couple of weeks ago. On FreeSend, it's slightly behind because we're not, the back end of FreeSend isn't as developed, but what we do have is all the census material from Cornwall is now available to be shared. We have a couple of new features on FreeSend and FreeReg, which should be live within the next few weeks. One of which is that the records will have permanent URLs. That is, there will be something that you can copy and put into your notes or into your family tree, which will always link back to that record on FreeReg. At the moment, or FreeSend, at the moment it won't. You can copy the URL, but it's a luck of the draw whether you end up on the same server next time. And if you don't, it'll give you a 404 error, but it will be a permanent one. For older records, those URLs will be prettified. By that we mean They will contain a bit of data as well. So it might say baptism, John Smith, Bradford, 1840, or census 1891, Julia Mackenzie, Colchester, which would be enough for you as a researcher to be able to look at a URL and work out who it is in your family tree, probably you're talking about. That will add in very nicely to another project which has been developed over the summer using a Google Summer of Code intern. This is an intern who is paid for by Google to work on our projects. And this, one of the two interns we had, has been working on creating citations from FreeSen and FreeReg. We have almost finished beta testing on that, and they again should go live in the next couple of weeks. This will mean when you go onto a record, at the moment you get a button that says, do you want to download this as a JSON file, which may mean something to some of you. There will be another button that says, do you want to download the citation to this? And we hope at that time it'll also then have that permanent URL in that citation. And you can choose which format you want to download in. You can choose MLA or Chicago if you're an academic. You can choose Wikitree if you use Wikitree, Family Tree Online if you use that, Legacy if you use Legacy, and Evidence Explained if you use Evidence Explained. We did some research about what people used and would find most useful. We can go on and add more if you're going, oh no, they missed my favourite way I use it. On FreeReg, another project we did on the Google Summer of Code, which is about probate, but my colleague is going to talk about that later, so I will skip over that. Image management on FreeReg, we've had some fabulous volunteers working on image management, and a lot of the coordinators on FreeReg are trialling it at the moment. This will completely change how transcribers, coordinators, and researchers can understand what we've got, what's available for transcription, what exists, but we don't necessarily have it. It may be that it's in a record office or a church that hasn't given us permission to have the images, or which has been destroyed. So if you're looking for a death record in a certain parish at a certain time, and we know that that burial register was destroyed, you'll know that you will not find it through a burial register. Also on FreeSen, we have just started looking at potential to do online transcriptions using an existing tool that is used by a lot of other transcribers, mostly using records from the United States and from Jewish communities across Europe. We've only done it at the moment with a single transcriber transcribing a piece. We're going to look at the quality that comes out of that to see how that compares to the traditional method of transcription. And we're also going to run it again, inviting anybody, whether they've transcribed or not, to have a go and see whether they can working on the same piece, to see whether that kind of free-for-all transcription results in any loss of quality compared to an experienced trained transcriber. And then we should decide whether to progress with that or not based on how useful it is and how good the transcriptions are. That's the end of my short update, but do grab me over lunch or at the end, or talk to us all in the discussion at the end about what's going on. The only thing I would leave you with is that we are trying to raise money for Free UK Genealogy in as many ways as we can think possible. And one of them we've recently signed up to is a recycling scheme where you can recycle your inkjet cartridges. If you usually throw your inkjet cartridge away, please do consider picking up an envelope from the table, and next time put the inject cartridge in that and post it off. It's a free post thing, and we get a little bit of money, a couple of pounds for you doing that. So with that note, I would like to hand over to Graham Hart, our trustee, who's going to be talking about the past, present and future of BMD.
Hello. Just need to get my laptop working here. It's all going to be a little Heath Robinson because I was expecting to be able to control everything from here, but the presentation's at the back, so I have to fight to see my notes. Okay. That's okay. Everything seems to be up. So, can you hear me all right? Yeah. Good. Okay. Right. So, my talk is on BMD, past, present, and future. This is part of the talk that I often give to family history societies, but the audience there are people who don't really know much about free UK genealogy or either of the three projects. So, there's quite a lot of it that I had to cut out that wasn't that relevant to the audience we have today, where all of you are pretty much involved in the projects. I've only got 20 minutes. It's often, as a talk, this takes about, it has taken 3 hours in the past. So I won't do that, I won't overrun, but so I'm going to rush a little bit and I have to skim through a few of the slides. It is focused on free BMD rather than free UK Gen, rather than free SEN and free Reg. Right, so, yeah, who am I? I'm a trustee of free BMD, one of the original ones with Ben and Camilla, who are at the back, who started the project. We'll talk about that now. Yeah, the agenda is to talk about the past, how it all started, the steps along the way, the present. I'll look very briefly at where we are now, and then the future, talk about a couple of the projects that we've got ongoing, but it's mainly going to be focusing on the process we went through, especially in the early days to get the project started. Okay, so what is it? You all know what this is anyway. Free UK Genealogy is a parent charity for the three projects. Right, what is free BMD? Well, this was this is what we have in our trust deed as to what free BMD was originally. So these are the things that we're meant to do. There are two main things that we're entitled to provide: an electronic database of birth, marriages, and death indexes, and then, subject to consent of other relevant authorities, we can transcribe other databases as necessary. How did we start it? Well, years ago, in the mid-90s, a guy called Dr. Brian Leverage, who was the founder of RootsWeb, who I think everyone will probably use, decided to form a society called the International Internet Genealogical Society. And in that was an idea. It was a whole load of people, genealogists worldwide, coming together on the internet and trying to work together to set up just anything we could, just to help each other. Lots of chat rooms, lots of everything. It was a massive attempt, and took a large part of our lives for a couple of years. It was incredibly busy, and that's where I met Ben and Camilla. We met online in various chat rooms. And we had a discussion about what could we achieve if the online genealogists worked together. There were potentially thousands of volunteers, and what could we manage to do if we got everyone together? So that was the discussion we had online. After that, I went away and put a few figures together to try and work out what I was going to do, what we might do. And we were saying, what should we transcribe? So the necessity of it was it had to be global because we were trying to get an international transcription project going. The source had to be available to everyone. We wouldn't be able to supply source to everyone. There had to be an interest, obviously, otherwise people wouldn't transcribe it. It had to be useful, otherwise people wouldn't use it. And so we came to the conclusion that the best thing was the GRO, birth registers and death registers. At the time, they were in St. Catherine's House, and we had the big books, and everyone, I'm sure, remembers going there, grabbing the books, bringing them off the shelves, finding where you were sitting, opening them up, looking for it, realising you've got the wrong one, go back, do it again, and just keep repeating, spending all day there and coming back with the arms aching, and about 5 records. And also the feature was available in libraries, so we're in a position to allow people overseas to get the source. So that was our decision on that. Our initial thoughts. So when I first I wrote something up and sent it to them. My things were that transcribers would research as normal. So you would turn up in your normal way, whether it's St Catherine's House or going to the fiche records. You would just turn up as normal, and you would research as normal. But when you found a record, you would transcribe 10 or 20 either side of that record. So we were just imagining that you would just go there, take that one, and then transcribe a certain number either side of it, and submit those to the project. And we imagined that we would have different transcriber types. You'd have the casual transcriber, who's the person who just occasionally goes there and does a few trips a year, and would do would just transcribe a few of them. You'd have a medium transcriber, people who regularly went there and would do their own research, but would transcribe fairly regularly. And then we imagined the intense ones where people would go there just for the project and they would actually transcribe deliberately for the project. And depending on the numbers of people we had across each of those, we imagined that, we actually worked out that the project was possible, but it would take a long time and not within our lifetimes. But that wasn't something that was going to get in the way, so we decided to go ahead with it anyway, because why not? Just on the basis of these transcriber types, because the reality is that we got completely different transcriber types, and the process that we did was completely different, and the ones we ended up with were the insane transcribers. For a long time, we've had 2 million plus records a month going into the site, and to be able to get that worldwide, 2 million records a month is insane. I think it's the only word for it, but we wouldn't have done it without it. The project startup. So having decided and discussed it, decided it was something we wanted to do at that stage. I think if it had been up to me, I'm not very good at moving things on, so I probably led to them, thought it was a good idea and put it on the site. But Ben and Camilla, much more organised than I am, and they wrote to the ONS to say, can we do it? And we spent a long time waiting for it to come back. I can't remember exactly how long, but we spent a long time waiting for it to come back. And eventually, we did get something back. On the 18th of May, they sent something back, which had a few discussion points, and then they sent a final agreement on the 13th of July 98, which gave us permission to transcribe. Now, you probably can't read this, but that is the letter. You can't actually read it. So we had 4 or 5 things. So we could only publish records that were 100 years old. Access to the information had to be free of charge. We had to include a Crown copyright acknowledgement and an instruction to end users to say that they mustn't copy on, transfer, etc., without prior permission of the ONS. And yes, suggestions about it. But that was our formal, yes, you can do this letter that then kicked the project off. So as you can see, that was 20 years ago, last July. Project startup. Well, we requested, just something. We had 100 things to talk about, loads of things to think about. There's the programming, the formats, data format, what would we put in the database, what formats would we ask people to submit data in, how would we manage to keep consistency in the database, all of that sort of stuff. The source, where would the source come from? Well, at this stage, we had no source particularly of our own, we had none of our own. So how would we allow people to get the source, and how would we handle that? The project structure, the whole idea, how would we organise something where there were effectively 3 of us trying to run this thing and trying to get it organised, how would we run it? And we were all busy with our normal day jobs as well, so how would we manage to do it? And some of the steps. So website hosting was provided by RootsWeb. So Brian Leverage, who had started the International Genealogy Society, kindly gave us first of all a test machine, and then gave us a live machine that we could use. So for a long time we were running on RootsWeb hardware, and our URL was freebnd.rootsweb.com was our original URL. The programming, Ben and I did it, and Ben did most of the hard programming. I did some of the soft programming, the syndicate coordination stuff, and that sort of stuff. And Camilla got organised and did lots of the organisation stuff and things. Definitely necessary. We got fiche. We managed to get hold of some fiche. We bought some fiche. We got a fiche printer, and we printed off various copies of those, and we sent them out to people. So initially, we were actually posting fiche out, prints of fiche out to people, which was again quite interesting and quite a logistical nightmare. But and we set up mailing lists. And most importantly, of course, we had transcribers and coordinators. We wouldn't have anywhere without them. So those were some of the early steps we went through in 98. We had 2 rules. So we found early on, and we had some experience with internet forums, and I'm sure everyone's had the same experiences, which is that if two people can argue, they will, no matter what. So we had two rules. Our first rule was control lies with the trustees, as in, we can have a discussion and quite happy with it, but ultimately the three of us would make a decision, and that would be the decision. So we just had a point to say that's the end of the discussion, and to give that, just stop discussions going on and on endlessly. And the second one, which you probably all know if you're free vending transcribers, is type what you see. The whole idea of type what you see is that it's easy for us programmatically to make adjustments and show adjustments later on. But if you type something that's not there, we lose that piece of information forever. So if you type what you see and you say, I can't see this letter, I don't know what it is, it could be an A or an E, then write that down and that information is held. Subsequently, we can do all the variations of that word that would include the A and the E. We can allow people to deal with that. But if you just guess it's an E, then no one in future knows that that might be an A, and that might be critical to someone searching. Obviously, more critical in terms of districts for free BMD. So if it's St George in the East, and someone just wrote down St George, and you think it's St George in the East, but it could be St George Hanover Square, it could be any of the hundreds of St Georges that exist in London. And so if you're second guessing, then we lose the information if you don't type what you see. So that was quite critical. The structure of free BMD, I think you probably know this, syndicates. So we set up syndicates and said we would have a coordinator, and then it was up to the coordinator to work with their transcribers and manage their transcribers. That offloaded the load from the three of us so that we could rely on coordinators to do that. That's obviously still the fundamental structure we have. I'm sure quite a few of you are free BMD syndicate coordinators. Sorry, did there again. Okay, same thing. No, the coordinators would control and track it. Oh no, sorry, syndicate coordinator, I'm going mad. So the syndicate coordinator, that was Alan Raymond. I don't know if Alan's here today, actually. Alan Raymond was our syndicate coordinator and managed the coordinators and still does, and he's done that job now for 20 years and he does it very well. And we also set up a district payments team. I put them there because they're often the hidden people behind free BMD that people don't know about. So the district payments team are the people who take all the mistranscriptions of districts and map them into what we think the correct district is, so that when you do a search, it maps in. I'll show one of the stats a bit later on as to how many they were doing per month at one stage in the project. And a quality coordinator. So the idea was we would always we would double key the records. And by double keying the records, that's the way that we would get the quality. So key the records twice, to give us the quality. Text structure, programming, obviously web developers, Speed BMD and WinBMD, both tools that were written for us by volunteers to allow people to transcribe on their PCs. Speed BMD was DOS-based, WinBMD was Windows-based. Then someone wrote a Mac version of it, someone wrote a Linux version of it. And then we ended up with BMD Verify, which is a great tool that tracks the scans that you've got and the line you're currently transcribing. As you transcribe it, moves the scan, it moves a highlight down on the scan so you can see it correctly. Without these tools, we wouldn't have got what we got. Project costs. So how do we, obviously we had no money at that stage, what do we do? So initially sponsorship. RootsWeb gave us the hardware and they gave us the bandwidth and they allowed us to use their servers. That was the initial way we did it. After a while, RootsWeb got bought out by Ancestry. And when that happened, Ancestry carried on supporting us, but we actually went to a formal agreement with them where they were sponsoring us, giving us some money as well as so that we could pay for our hosting. In return, they were able to show the records on their site, but they had to be shown free. So there was they couldn't charge for them, but they had to be accessible through the Ancestry site, but in a free route. We don't have any sponsorship now. We stopped the Ancestry deal once we became self-sufficient with our own income streams, and we didn't want to be beholden to one of the major genealogy sites. So And our mainstream now is advertising. So initially with Ancestry, we were showing Ancestry ads. We now show ads from lots of other places, whether it's Google AdSense or wherever, and there's quite a lot of work that goes on to make sure that those ads are giving us the return we want. And the money from those ads are what fundamentally pays for free BMD, in fact, free UK genealogy, the whole lot. Source, talked about source. So initially it was find your own. So we were just basically saying, okay, you're going to transcribe this, just go and find your own source. Go, if your local library, or if you can get to the ONS or the St Catherine's House or the Family Record Centre. Then we did fiche and printed copies of fiche, which was quite difficult, but we did that. Then finally we got scans of film. So we were donated, at various times we were donated some films. We ended up with a scanner, and we managed to get through and scan the films. And then finally, initially we weren't allowed to show those images or publish them anywhere. And eventually the permission came through that we could publish them, and then we were able to put the images onto our server. And what people do now is to go to the server, download an image, and then transcribe that image, so they no longer have to go anywhere else. But prior to that, you had to find your source from somewhere else, and the coordinators would typically try and do that. We've had donations of film copies from various groups, and a copy of all the images are now up on the site. So as you know, if you search FreeBMD, you find a record, you can click into it and see the original scan. And you should always do that, because you should double check that it hasn't been mistranscribed, so you can see the scan and have a look at it. If it's wrong, you can submit a correction. And all transcriptions are performed using film scans. Source, why not OCR? Okay, so one of the things we had was, why shouldn't we just do this with OCR? Well, for typed entries, 90% at the time, 90% was considered good for OCR. But if you have a 90% success rate, that means you've got a 10% failure rate. And 10% failure rate would give us approximately 1 error in every 2 records, and which is just not acceptable. In something like FreeBMD, where every word counts, there's no superfluous information on there, you'd be getting an error in every 2 records. We'd end up with a database that wasn't worth using. So OCR didn't really work out. We were going through a lot of other things at the same time, which I'll just touch on briefly. So at the same time, there was a project going on. I think it was still called Project Dove, or maybe I'll talk about it later on. But there was a project going on for the government to transcribe the indexes, and they would then do their own transcription and make them available to everyone. And there was a lot of criticism that we were doing something that would just be a complete waste of time. And at the time, we put the argument together that we much as the government would want to put the money into it, as soon as there would be a change of government, they would then slash the funds. They would have to think about it again and restart it again, and the project would never complete. And as we said, we would rather get 10 or 20 years down the line and then the project become useless than go 20 years down the line and think we should start the project now. I think that's held out. So the government, I think, have gone through 3 or 4 iterations of trying to transcribe the records, and they still haven't completed them or even really started it in anger. So yeah, I think it was the right decision at the time. Handwritten entries, yeah, for OCR, handwritten entries, of course, OCR is just terrible. Quality assurance with double keying. You'd use separate syndicates to double key so that you don't have the same people transcribing the same thing twice, because they'll see the same errors. And ideally with separate sorts, although that's not always possible. And the system compares the sequence of entries with some code that Ben wrote, having stolen it from the Human Genome Project that matched DNA sequences. And the results are indicated in the status of the record. So when you look at a record, depending on its shade, it tells you whether that record's been single keyed or double keyed. The timeline of the project, right, this is a lot of gunk about what happened throughout all the various years that we were doing. So I'll skim through a lot of this. 1998, we got the permission. July to December, we did a lot of development about processes and code. We got some volunteers to come in and help out. We were calling for volunteers, but not ready to accept transcriptions, accept test transcriptions. The FreeBMD admins list was created on the 18th of September. The 30th of December, we did a formal announcement to announce the project to the world. In December, we got a dedicated server from RootsWeb, which became our live machine, and we went live at the end of December in 98. In 99, Dave Mail joined us as one of the 3, became the 4th owner of the project. We had a new logo, the FreeBMD logo, up the top left without the @20. District agencies, we were very pleased to hit 90,000 records, 100,000 records. I was talking to Ben just now, and one of the things that Ben was running database updates, he could run multiple a day at that time. Nowadays, it takes the best part of 3 weeks to run an update. But whenever we ran the update, Ben included an estimate of when we felt the project would finish. And we were just talking about one, we remembered when the answer came within the scope of actually fitting into a 32-bit integer, which means it basically we can actually show the answer. And then secondly, we all got excited when it became within our lifetime. That was a major point. We thought we actually might finish this before our lifetime. Actually, in March, we got a letter from the ONS giving formal instructions for people who own the fiche and own films. So these are libraries around the world, giving them instructions on basically saying that they could write to the ONS, and the ONS would give them permission to show those and allow FreeBMD people to transcribe them. So we got a full route through. We're finding some resistance in libraries around the world that they couldn't show, that they couldn't let us transcribe. Syndicate management facilities, etc. I won't go through all of these because there's loads of them. We hit 1 million records in 2000, then we hit 2 million records in 2000, then 3 million records in 2000. You know, for us, just seeing that rate of increase was incredible. We didn't expect anything like it. And then 2001, we were at 5,000. We were hitting 720 entries a month, 720,000 entries a month. And Ancestry purchased a set of films. In fact, that's not completely true. 1837 to 1900, we got a set of films which gave us the early years that we could then sell. In May, we hit 10 million entries, and we were doing 2 million transcriptions per month. And in July, Ian Brooke launched WinBMD and David Lang launched BMD Verify, both of which are tools that we couldn't have done without. Okay, we had 3,000 transcribers at the end of that. I won't go through all of these. 2003 was a big year. We formed a charity. We formed a charity because there were always comments going on that as a project we had set something up that we were eventually going to sell and make ourselves millionaires. That was never the case, and we're not millionaires now. But we decided to form a charity to make it very clear that the money that comes out of the project gets invested back into the project and that no one's making a profit out of it. Permission from the ONS to include all records. So they removed the 100-year rule. Prior to that, we couldn't show any records that were 100 years, less than 100 years old, or less than 100 years old. But at that point, we could then show them and start to transcribe them. So that was a major thing. The district alias team, I mentioned them earlier a bit. So at this stage, they were doing 1,000 new district spellings every month. So basically every month with the 2 million transactions, 2 million records that we were getting, transcriptions we were getting, out of those, there were typically 1,000 districts that never appeared and didn't fit in the district thing. And they had to go through each of them and map them to say what they thought they were. Now they use a mix of things, the volume number and the page range for the particular year is allocated to a particular district, so they would use those to work those districts out. And then in the programming in the background, we would then show the correct district, but with a indicator that what we thought the district was, so you would see both. Quality control reports started coming out, suspect files and duplicate files. That allows coordinators to know whether they duplicated some of the data, or and suspect files are files that we felt were wrong. Maybe the heading was wrong, or they were in the wrong year, or they overlapped certain things. And we started to buy film from the ONS, and we started to get it scanned. Archive CD books, Rob Neep, who also happens to be the person who started Free Reg, scanned those for free for us, which was very nice of him. 71 million records at that stage, 6,000 transcribers, and 2.7 million per month, which is probably about close to our peak of transcriptions per month, I think, around that time. We had 2 new servers dedicated to the scans. FreeSend, so 2005, FreeSend and FreeReg joined FreeBMD as part of the charity, so we incorporated them into the charity, and we started to use our funds to support their servers as well at that point. Let's see. In 2007, the Society of Genealogists awarded us the Prince Michael of Kent Award, which was for distinguished and outstanding services to genealogy. It's only been awarded 3 times previously, and we were very proud to get that. And then marriages after 1912 with searchable by spouse, and we were up to 135 million records. 2008, I'll just skim through these now, not there. 2008, corrections requests at 5,000 a month. So Kevin Howells, who has now unfortunately died, was at that time dealing with 2,500 corrections every month himself. So he was going through and sorting them out himself. Massive amount of work he got through, as well as doing a lot of the scanning for us. And the other 2,500 were handled by the syndicates of own volunteers. So he was dealing with ones where the transcriber had disappeared or the syndicate wasn't clear. And we hit 200 million records. In 2009, we added Alan Raymond as a trustee. 2010, We got an executive director. Obviously, we have Pat now as our executive director, but we decided that it was a bit too difficult for the 3 or 4 of us to manage the project. We're all busy with our normal our normal day jobs, and we weren't really able to focus on what was now quite a big project, and especially all of the governance aspects of it. So we decided to get an executive director in to help us move things forward. Nick Barrett was the first one. We increased numbers of directors. We had Darren White became our executive director, and then Pat came in 2015. And we have trustees, and we now have quite a few trustees, and that brings us through to the present day where we are now. So the present day, we need to move on. Okay, no. So these are all of our trustees as it stands at the moment. Alexandra has just joined us as trustee, and she's talking next. The support team. So this is our support team. Now at the moment, these are generally people that we pay to do the work. If we didn't pay them to do the work, what we found with the volunteers, especially from the programming side and the management side of things, is things just didn't get done. We couldn't move things on because we couldn't guarantee the time that people were putting in. And although there's a few of them, all of them are part-time, and the effective cost is the equivalent of 3 people, effectively 3 people working with us, a mix of technical and organisational. We have teams that look after each of the projects and a development group. And how far are we now? So as where we're at the moment is 269 million distinct records. So distinct records are records that don't count the double key. So if they've been double keyed, we forget the double key. So they're the individual records. So you have 269 million distinct records on the site at the moment, 345 total records, which include the double key records. Transcription rate is currently 600,000 per month, so still very high given where we are. Not as high as it used to be. And searches yesterday were 131,000 searches during yesterday. The future, okay. We want to complete the first scan. Now at the moment, Alan Raymond gave us a estimate. He reckons it will be done either at the end of this quarter, the end of this year, or early next year. So at the moment, we think that's our target for completing the first set of data up to 1984. The second set of data is quite different. We've done 75 million so far, and we've got 269 million in total, so there's still quite a way to go. But obviously, some people will move from the first transcription into the second transcription, so that will then move on faster, but that will be going on in the background. That's our first thing's completed. FreeBMD2, we've got the new website, so I think Pat mentioned we're going to have a website for FreeBMD that will match the FreeSend and the FreeReg newly designed websites. There is a survey on there, and if you could have a look at that survey and go and answer questions on it, it's basically talking about what things you'd like to see in a transcription, what you use, what you don't use, so that we can get some good feedback as to what should be in the what should go into FreeBMD2. Open data. Okay, we talked about open data a fair bit in these projects. I want to touch on it briefly now. So when we started FreeBMD, we wanted to make sure that these things were available so that people could use them and make sure they're available free. FreeBMD data and FreeSend data and FreeReg data will always be available free on the Free UK Gen websites. We will always keep them available free, so we will never change that. What we're looking at with open data is that because we now have such a good data set, we would really like people to use it. So if someone wants to work and write a project where they want to work out the distribution of a surname across different geographical regions, or they want to do all sorts of things using our data, whether it's FreeSend, FreeReg, or FreeBMD, or they want to link them together and do stuff. By doing open data, we allow them to access our data. They can write something. Now, if they write something and spend their time doing it, and it's worthwhile for the genealogy community, then we feel that they should be able to charge for that if they want to. They will provide something. If they provide something that isn't very good, then people won't buy it. And also, if they provide something that's easy to do, then someone else will come and undercut them and do the same thing. So at the end of the day, this will balance out. The idea of this is to allow people to be a bit entrepreneurial in what they want to achieve and to get better use of the data out there. So rather than just say, well, here it is, we now want to use the computing power of the internet, all the other systems we've got, machine learning, etc., to try and make the best use of what is now a fantastic resource. The Society of Genealogists. We've got agreement with Society of Genealogists to, they will show FreeBMD, FreeReg and FreeSend on their website, and in return we get some sponsorship back and some advertising back through their signatures. So that's been signed and sealed. upcoming projects, free probate. Okay, free probate, which we like to call free will, but it's free probate. Apparently, it can't be free will because the domain names aren't available. But, so free probate. We've had these are the probate records from is it 1858? 1858 onwards. They're the standard probate indexes that are available in other places, but we wanted to make them available as well. The books were given to us by the Oxford Family History Society, and we're getting them. We've already got them scanned. We had someone working over the summer as part of the Summer of Code thing, looking at machine learning to read the records and identify who the testator was, who the witnesses were, who beneficiaries are, and so they can pull the data out. So that's going to run through the machine learning exercise. Now, interestingly, we are using OCR for this. The reason this is more relevant for OCR than the other records than the B&D records is because there's a lot more. It's a lot more textual. So if you've got the word, if you've got the word marriage in there and the I is missing, you're still going to guess that's marriage. You're going to be able to read it. It's not the same as missing records out of missing letters out of a B&D record. And that's underway at the moment. So we have this machine learning thing, and that's all now ready to go. The machine learning code is there, and the process will be to start to put that all through the system, and then our tech team is going to start writing the interfaces and the search engines for that to allow that to start searching. Free Passplace. Okay, Free Passplace is working with linked data. So Passplace have information about locations. So locations aren't just in the way they put it. They're not just space. They're space and time. So if you're in if you're in Middlesex at a particular time, the borders of Middlesex change completely, or the villages and towns and parishes changed over time. So the idea with Free Passplace is to enable to link our projects up into their geographical databases, so that if someone's sitting there saying, I want to find this, I want to find that, they can do some analysis that will identify, yes, that person could have been in these places or those places or whatever. So it's a beginning of one that Richard is heavily involved in. Richard, I want to talk about it, yeah, Richard's the person to talk about this. Access to the mother's maiden name at the age of death. So the GRO searches at the moment, I'm sure you all know that if you go to the GRO searches, you can get the mother's maiden name for all the births. It's incredibly useful, and as a genealogist, I use it all the time. And age of death data is also on there for earlier than it's available in normal indexes. Now, we would like to have that available for free B&D. We'd like to put it against our records, and then we would allow people to search across the full range. At the moment, you can only search a maximum of 5 years. You have to put a name in there, you have to put a sex in there, various other restrictions. We'd like to enable that to just be a standard search across free B&D. But we're waiting to hear whether we can get access to those records. Our future, well, this is it. Yeah, we're going to continue to transcribe until it's complete, continue to push for full availability and transcription of original records, and continue to support free access to records. Okay. I think it's Alexandra next.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Graham.
Hello, I went sort of old school with the notes, so I've now got too many things to hold, but hopefully we'll get on okay. As you saw from Rose's slides, I'm a fairly new trustee of Free UK Genealogy, but I'm also a professional archivist by background. My current day job is Collections Information Manager at Wellcome Collection. And so my talk today on crowdsourcing is going to be drawing on that professional experience. I'm currently also co-editing a book on participatory archives, which covers everything from crowdsourced transcription to crowdfunding to some kind of social justice type projects, all of which are based on used archival sources of one kind or another. But it also draws particularly on research that I carried out on online participation in the archive sphere as part of a PhD. Between 2010, when crowdsourcing was a fairly unknown term amongst my profession and fellow sectors in libraries, museums, right up to 2015, by which time it had become a little bit more established, and particularly well established, I think, for indexing and classification tasks. And it's striking, I think, to note that many of the most successful projects I encountered as part of that research, we got quite a lot of feedback. Was that just me? Can you have to move on? Move it a bit. Is that better? That's worse. Okay, I'll hold it here if people can hear. Some of the most successful projects I came across as part of that research. Okay. So, okay. Have been genealogical, or they started out indexing personal names of one kind or another. And you'll see some of the quotes I'll share later in this presentation of contributors to a Dutch project called Vele Handen, meaning many hands in Dutch, as in many hands, many light work, which was inaugurated by Amsterdam City Archives in 2010 with an experiment to index the city's militia registers. And it's since grown into a highly successful crowdsourcing platform for Dutch-speaking contributors. Independently, in the same year, 2010, a project to index Danish police registration records began in Copenhagen. By the way, I've added some URLs to these to my final slide if anyone wants to look them up afterwards. And one or two people in the room may know the American software developer Ben Bromfield. I think he's been involved in the advisory group, who was inspired by his own great-grandmother's diaries to start what's become a kind of major collaborative transcription software project. So actually, just before I go any further, I thought I'd ask a very quick show of hands from people in the room. How many of you would consider yourselves to be crowdsourcers? Smattering. Okay. And how many of you would say you were active volunteers on one of the free UK genealogy projects? Much more. Okay. So that's actually really interesting, because I think in cultural heritage domains generally, crowdsourcing is particularly associated with distributed transcription activities. And I think many of my fellow professionals as archivists would consider volunteer genealogy indexing as a kind of archetypal crowdsourcing success story. Collaboration, after all, is a key component to success for today's genealogists. So whether that's discussions with fellow family historians on Facebook or Twitter, or compiling an online tree. Most of today's family historians are familiar and relatively comfortable with the idea of sharing their knowledge and using their skills online. That isn't necessarily true of some other historical research communities, particularly perhaps academics, who tend to be a bit more guarded about their expertise, slightly less willing to contribute maybe without direct benefit to themselves. After all, this is their livelihood that they're having to deal with. This is a dictionary definition of crowdsourcing. Very obviously, crowdsourcing is a term that combines crowd and outsourcing. It was first coined in an article in Wired magazine in 2006, so it's been around for 12 years. Now, obviously, this definition is pretty broad. It has to be broad enough to encompass all kinds of online contributing behaviour, from Wikipedia, say, to reviews on TripAdvisor, right through to some really quite ethically questionable, maybe, human behaviour, what are called human intelligence tasks, which are advertised on Amazon account called Turk. But if you remove the option for paid work and the dependency on the internet, you should be able to see quite a lot of commonality, I think, between crowdsourcing and volunteering of the kind that should be familiar to most of those who put their hands up, and I said, who sees themselves as a contributor as opposed to as a crowdsourcer. So in other words, I think you could legitimately view FreeBMD and its FreeGen cousins as crowdsourcing pioneers, or kind of analogues which predate crowdsourcing as a term in itself. And when you look at collaborative volunteering of the free gen kind, and this is a kind that you also see reflected, I think, in family history societies up and down the country. The volunteering tends to coalesce around certain shared community interests, and then those community interests get translated online when the project's transferred to the internet. So in the case of family history volunteering, participation, which is often transcription activity of some kind, usually requires pretty dedicated contributor cognitive effort, and it's sustained in some way by social interaction. We're all here today in the room. The work's often quite challenging, often difficult. It may involve transcribing sometimes an entire register, say, or at least a whole page. But even where data entry is the responsibility of a single individual and it's completed online, so it's done online because nowadays that's convenient. Even in those circumstances, volunteers will quite commonly meet in person, say, for training, or just to have a chat or to discuss progress towards an open-ended cause. And if you look at Free UK's current mission to create high-quality transcriptions of public records from government sources, parish churches and other trusted institutions, it's a classic mission statement that kind of fits this community conception of volunteering, at least I would say so. The quote is from contributor to the Historical Citizen Science site on weather. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. But I included it to demonstrate that contributors to, even where the projects are entirely online, they often testify to this kind of community experience in the way interactions develop with fellow participants, other participants act as motivators, sources of support, friendship and camaraderie. The motivations often, or generally, is some kind of intrinsic motivation with altruistic elements to it. I noticed there was a quote on the slideshow at the beginning from somebody who said he wanted to give back to the MD, what he'd taken from it as a researcher. And so commitment extends well beyond completing just a single task or just dealing with the subject matter directly in front of them. So rather, if you're part of a crowdsourcing community, you would be inspired and encouraged by a sense of belonging to a fairly trusted group of people with similar interests. And the discussion that goes on in these kind of communities can reveal new perspectives, things you haven't thought about in terms of the sources you're transcribing. It distributes contextual knowledge. It's also a mechanism for very rapid problem solving if you can't read a particular entry or something of that kind. Reciprocity is a key characteristic of these kind of communities, and the coordinators or moderators of roles in online projects are usually drawn from this core community set of participants. So I hope all of that sounds fairly familiar as contributors to Free Gen projects. But you've probably heard too of a phenomenon or characteristic long tail of participation in crowdsourcing projects. And this is where you get a skewed pattern of participation where the majority of contributors actually, in fact, contribute very little individually, perhaps as little as a single transcription, but a few super contributors seem to kind of turn the project into almost a full-time job. I guess this is Graham's insane contributors. This is now quite an old, but I like it because it's colourfully graphic, illustration of this phenomenon for the original Old Weather project, which was participants were asked to transcribe weather data from Royal Navy logbooks held here at the National Archives, and for climate change research purposes. But despite its scientific objectives, this project actually attracted quite a considerable number of genealogists who were more interested in the narrative related in the logbooks, in which often the logbooks were from ships that their ancestors had served in. So in this infographic, each box represents one person who's transcribed at least one page for Old Weather in 2012. The area of the box is proportional to the number of pages transcribed. So the large pink box at the top left is the person who's done the most transcriptions. Part of my study of old weather as part of my PhD was aiming to uncover more about the casual engagement or kind of micro-volunteering experiences of the people that are represented in the bottom right-hand corner. And I was also interested in the factors that were discouraging participation. And in doing this, I discovered quite a lot about what differentiates the full crowd, everybody represented on this infographic, from the online transcription community that is the kind of core of the super transcribers, the people that do the most at the top left. But I also came a little bit counterintuitively maybe to see quite a lot of value in focusing more attention on the needs of and the motivations of the people at the bottom right. Because this is the entry point for new contributors, and it's also potentially a dormant pool of kind of latent talent, which you might tempt back into greater activity. So one way I like to think about crowds is to think of them as kind of upside down communities. I mentioned how community members are very often their committees to a challenge, but you'll only attract a crowd if the entry threshold is comparatively low and preferably open to all comers. Busy people can't necessarily take on the transcription of a whole register or even just a page, but they might be willing to do just the odd entry here and there between other activities. So the people that are participants in a crowd tend to fit participation around their day-to-day life, rather than it being an activity for which they make time specifically. And there was, this interestingly came up in the board meeting this morning, there was quite a strong seasonal fluctuation actually to people's participation when I spoke to them. So it was something they were more likely to pick up in the winter months, rather than when it was sunny and they preferred to be outside. So again, whereas communities are socially motivated, they're also constrained to some degree by the limitations of this in-person communication. And crowdsourcing, in contrast, tends to appeal to participants across a wide geographic distribution, very often across time zones, and possibly, as you'd expect with a crowd, some participants prefer to remain anonymous. So 4% of the Dutch project I told you a little bit about, in their first project, 4% of those participants lived outside of the Netherlands, as far apart as the United States and Australia. Crowd contributors also tend to be more specifically task-focused, and they're motivated by results in pursuit of fixed goals, and I forgot to put that up. I'll give you 2 seconds to read that. And those fixed goals might in some instances be stimulated or rewarded by competition against other participants. Now, this idea that transcription or indexing activities could be turned into some kind of game where participants compete against each other to make the most contributions, the idea that their main motivation for taking part might simply be to have fun, that tends to be quite an alien concept to people who come from the more traditional community-orientated volunteering background, and I might say to people from my profession who are very suspicious of a lot of this so-called gamification type of crowdsourcing. But particularly, I think where tasks are pretty repetitive, they might be mundane or trivial, gamification can actually be quite effective in focusing participants' attention on a fixed term or a short-term goal. And it acts kind of as an additional extrinsic reward, validating the contribution in some limited sense. It's often particularly effective for hooking in new contributors, and particularly so in the early phases of a project when everybody's competing on a pretty level playing field. But gamification, which I can say is a term I hate, but there's no better alternative, it comes with a caveat. So the emotional reaction to achieving a promotion on Lord Runner or a high score on the project leaderboards, so the cadet to lieutenant to captain is Mark Webber, the illustration on the right is from the Dutch project with the company leaderboard. That emotional reaction is very often pretty fleeting. It's clear that there is always some high-scoring participants who are spurred on by kind of vying for this top position, but the low-scoring participants are very often simultaneously demotivated by this distant competition. They have no hope of reaching, they can't turn their participation into a full-time job, they just can't keep up, they find it stressful, exhausting, they may just find a competitive system trivialising, or even that it undervalues smaller contributions in some ways. And I even spoke to some more occasional participants who just deliberately disregarded it or were completely unaware it existed. So it's a kind of double-edged sword competition, but it does, in some instances, answer a purpose. I think one of the problems with competition is that it's effectively an attempt to motivate contributors by encouraging interaction of some kind. It's not social interaction in this instance, it's competitive, but it's still interaction. And so it holds very little appeal for micro-volunteers who, quite frankly, would rather be left alone to make their own choices about what they want to do and when. So, like the competitors, there's a section of the crowd who are still interested in having fun in pursuit of a short-term goal, but the challenge here is much more personal to the participant. It's quite common to describe this kind of participation as a bit like doing a crossword puzzle or some kind of detective work. But these more challenge-orientated crowd contributors are usually working independently. Feedback and progress monitoring is important to them, but usually for self-assessment reasons and to see that their contributions are making a difference and a difference to the project overall. And I want at this point to emphasise one thing, really underline this. I think it's very important to note that nearly all the crowdsourced transcription projects report very high levels of accuracy, despite the isolation of contributors. Sometimes reviewing and checking tasks are helpful. They can be turned into a bit of a variety for your participants. They can also be adapted as a means for more experienced volunteers to develop their skills or for new people to gain confidence. So most transcription crowdsourcing functions on the basis of at least 2, usually 3 or more independent transcriptions of each source entry. Those may be verified algorithmically before human review, but there's often a need for a judgment call as well where the input diverges. And one other thing while I'm on accuracy, enabling participants to assess the accuracy of their own contribution is important not only for quality control reasons, but also significantly because anxiety about the quality of one's own contribution often results in people dropping out of participation altogether, which obviously risks the size of your participating crowd. But it's also evidence that the entry threshold may be too high for attracting new contributors if they find it too difficult or they can't judge whether their contribution is good enough. So, by way of concluding, I noticed that I was scheduled for the slot before lunch, so I thought I'd end with a few kind of tips or a summary of this research in terms of do's and don'ts and how to attract a hungry crowd to an indexing or transcription project. Actually, I think these principles that I'm about to go through would hold for just about all kinds of crowdsourcing, but I hope they're particularly helpful for anyone in the room who might be approaching new free UK Gen projects, and for people who are looking at crowdsourcing from the perspective of a more established core community. So firstly, I suggest it helps to think of crowdsourcing as offering a series of meze or tapas dishes or tasks that make up a crowdsourcing meal, rather than serving up one enormous dish. a variety of different tasks, which kind of match to a diversity of participant skills and abilities and time to contribute. So some of those tasks will need to be snacks. They'll need to be quick to complete so that beginners aren't discouraged by attempting things which take ages to do or are just far too difficult for them. But too many of those snacks and the project becomes boring and repetitive. So you have to it's quite a tricky balance, I think. But different levels of challenge, of course, help enhance the participant's sense of progression, and they increase layers of difficulty so that people can move through the project and learn as they go on. And remember as well, I think Jen does this very well already, but remember that some participants might actually like to be involved in the development of new projects or try a new responsibility, whereas there will also be a crowd of people who would just prefer to stick with something familiar that they know they can do well. Secondly, the menu planning. Participants seem to appreciate it if they know what they're working towards. So some kind of menu, that might be a project progress board. It's useful for participants to plan their own way through the project so that they know what the end goal is, and so that they can see how what they're doing relates to the project as a whole. Along similar lines, the basic idea of crowdsourcing is that anyone can participate, that they don't need previous knowledge, and there shouldn't be any kind of admission test or barrier. The task doesn't always have to be easy, that's not quite what I'm saying, but it must always be clear. So every project should provide instructions, some kind of recipe explaining what it is you're asking the volunteer to do, and preferably with some very clear examples. This is my don't. Remember that too much refined processed food is bad for you. In other words, try not to ask people to do things that a computer can process easily and more quickly. So thinking about, does a human checker need to look at every single entry or just those where the entries disagree? It's interesting to hear Graham talk about free probate, might optical character recognition, increasingly I have to say handwriting character recognition offer a first stage solution in some instances, and then ask the crowd to do the checking that requires a human judgment call after the first pass by the machine. It becomes very wearing on people to ask them to do things they know a machine can do better than them. Enabled tasting. There are two kind of aspects to this. Firstly, letting potential participants get an idea of what the project involves before committing themselves too much. And secondly, checking that your food tastes good just kind of during the cooking. In other words, providing a food feedback loop, allowing participants to assess the quality of their own contributions. And ultimately, this is important too for ensuring accuracy and the usefulness of the project's results. And then finally, and this should be obvious to everybody in the room on the 20th anniversary of 3MD, don't forget to celebrate success. But not just the completion of the project overall. Everybody, I think, appreciates some recognition or praise of their efforts, and there are lots of ways of doing this online and offline, of course. But Valhanden, just to give you some examples, Valhanden awards virtual points for every contribution, which can be saved up and then redeemed by participants for, say, a high resolution document scan or saved up to buy a book. They also award occasional gifts at milestones, so the point at which they reach 50% of a project, or maybe the 50,000 entry to be transcribed. And I think they see that's quite important as a way to ensure beginners can be rewarded as well as the established volunteers. Other things that have been incorporated in transcription crowdsourcing with some success include team contests, so not the competition between individuals, but a kind of team effort to get a certain number of records transcribed, or whatever it might be, some kind of scheduled challenge, or it could involve some offline or even on, and I guess expert workshops that kind of related events of some kind or another. That was pretty much all I had to say on crowdsourcing. I said I put the links up to various projects that I referenced. If anyone's got any questions.
Great, there'll be some time later on for discussion where we can ask questions to the speakers and things like that. Thank you very much, Alexandra. Right, so if you would like to go and get yourself some lunch and we'll come back, should we make it,
Do you need the
can you hear me back? Yeah, it's okay, I don't need my voice. If you can come back about 5 to 2, that would be fantastic. And we will start the second part of our conference then. Thank you very much. Oh, just while you're on your way out, we've got some complimentary bookmarks just to remember the day on the table out there as well. And I will be giving the answers to the Victorian slang quiz a little bit later on as well. Thanks, Emily.
I'm going to use it.
It's just going to slip, isn't it? Oh no, okay. Does it move up or does it?
No, it's just screwed onto the little stand.
Yeah, but has it got a little ball joint to?
No, just
Oh,
solid.
okay.
I mean, the only thing that might work is putting it like that.
Yeah, that's going to fall off, isn't it? Somebody will push the lectern and it will go.
Gaffer tape. What we need is gaffer tape. Then we're oh god.
They've probably got to roll up the back. I'll see that.
All right. I also want gaffer tape. I suppose we are still being recorded live at the moment.
I think so. Yes, it is.
Just let people know how concerned we are with it.
So it actually runs that, just as a thought, rather than a red blob.
That's probably a good idea.
We could, if we turn, if we
To actually move the whole.
Turn, left turn.
Just hope you do it
that way.
without breaking everything.
I don't know. Oh, it's
Any better?
backwards. Why is it backwards?
Why is it backwards?
It's showing it backwards.
Oh, it's inverted.
Well, there's a question for you.
It's no.
Probably the reason. Yeah. So we're thinking about why it's happening. Which means every presenter would have.
But people's faces don't look wrong backwards.
This is the best conversation of the day. Yeah.
No, I haven't.